Okay, welcome back, guys. So what we're going to do today is, this is now Practicum 12, and we're going to move our data that we generated from Photoscan into ArcGIS ArcScene. So ArcScene, as I've mentioned in class, is the 3D visualization and sort of editing and analytical component of ArcGIS. And so go ahead and open ArcScene. So this is kind of an introduction to the interface, how it works a little bit, and a preview of working with DEMs. In this case, we're going to be looking at it in 3 dimensions, so it's kind of fun too. We get a sense of the quality of our model that we generated. So once you have ArcScene open, a couple preliminary things. So the very first thing you want to do is go up to Customize and go to Extensions and check the 3 boxes for the extensions. We do have those. They're not enabled by default when the installation is done. So that's just to avoid errors being thrown when you're doing processing. And if you close this program and open it again, they'll stay checked. It's persistent. You just have to do it that one time. Okay, so that's done. So let's go to geoprocessing. And I want to change one option in geoprocessing, which is to disable the background geoprocessing or the background processing. So make sure the check is not there next to enable. So background geoprocessing in theory is nice because what it does is it invokes a 64-bit geoprocessing module that we installed. So that's nice in that it can handle bigger files, bigger jobs, and so forth. But my experience has been is that it tends to crash quite a bit. So I like to disable it unless I really need it. Okay. And Esri, I think, put that 64-bit geoprocessing in there because it was sort of a quick fix alternative to having to write the entire suite over again in 64-bit code. So I think that's coming out with ArcGIS version 11, the next major release, which is, I'm not sure when that's coming out. So they just, as a sort of halfway house, introduced this 64-bit background geoprocessing. Anyway, we're gonna disable it. So let's hit OK here. So some quick stuff on the interface. Let's see, you probably have, if you don't have the table of contents up, you probably do, but if you don't, get it here under Windows, Table of Contents. Go to Windows and check Catalog too, so that you have this catalog available. You can, I think, access it there as well. Okay. And, okay, yeah, let's go over to the catalog here. And so the first thing we want to do is move a few files around. You probably don't have a connection to where your thumb drive is. If you do, that's great. Like if you see it listed or wherever your data is, if you see it listed here, that's good. If you don't, you're going to have to create a new folder connection. So go connect to folder. And like mine is on, my data right now is just sitting on my desktop for this practicum. So we're just connecting to the folder. So I'm just highlighting desktop and hit OK. And then it creates the connection for it. Okay, so then within that, what we want to do is you've got Practicum 11. Let's create a new folder for Practicum 12. So hit new folder. I'm not going to do it because I've already done it, but click on folder there. And then what you want to do is rename it to Practicum 12, okay? So now we've got Practicum 12, it's an empty folder, and we want to put a couple of subfolders in it. And we can do that, but we're just going to move the DEM folder from Practicum 11 down there, okay? So some quick things on the catalog window here. There's a couple little things that are not very intuitive, right? So I've got this pane showing right now that shows the contents of the folder. Like this is Practicum 12 and this is the stuff inside of it. Down here I can like click and drag and select multiple things. Up here, if I were to double click it and show it up here, I can only click I can only select one at a time, even if I hold down Shift or Control or whatever. So, you know, for a long time I couldn't understand why in the catalog window you couldn't select more than one thing, and it's because you can only do it down here, and you can only see that if you enable the contents panel up here. Okay, so the contents panel is now there. Okay, so anyway, we're going to use that aspect here in a little bit. So we just want to take from your Practicum 11 folder, copy the DEM and paste it into Practicum 12, and do the same for the Orthomosaic folder and paste. Right, I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it. So that'll take a little bit. Do them one at a time. There's a lot of data in there. And then on Practicum 12, right-click on it, on the folder, and go New File Geodatabase. And it's going to create a new file geodatabase. Looks like a little silver cylinder like that. And then rename it to Practicum_12. Okay. So that's good. This will be our home directory now. So let's go over to File and go to Save As. Save as Practicum 12. So you're going to type it in there. You can press Save. In my case, it's going to throw a warning because it already exists, so I'm not actually going to do it, but go ahead and create Practicum 12 there in your Practicum 12 folder, right? Now let's set up the relative paths to data sources. And actually, let me open my Practicum 12 here. Okay. Remove this. Okay, so go to Scene Document Properties under File in your Practicum 12 that you're in. Okay, make sure you've got Store Relative Path Names to Data Sources checked. And now set your default geodatabase to the one that we just created. Okay, so just click on it once and then hit Add and hit Apply and OK. All right, so that's going to just help streamline work in general. And that's a good practice to get into before you start working on stuff like give your map document or your ArcScene document a name and set the relative paths and set the default geodatabase. Create one if you need to. Yeah, that'll help. Okay, so then what we want to do is, let me just show you. Okay, so if I go inside my DEM folder, you won't have this merged folder yet, but you will in a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to select multiple items like I was talking about. I can do that down here. I click on the top one, hold down Shift, and click on the bottom one, and I can drag them over. You don't need to do that, but if you did, it's okay. We can remove them later. Now you'll see each of these DEMs comes in, and it's like a checkerboard. What's going on with that, right? So that's just because each of these tiles has a different range of pixel values in it, right? And the grayscale is being scaled to those different ranges, if that makes sense, right? So this top one here has a range of 135 to almost 139. This next one only has 136, basically. Like it's less than a meter of difference in that whole tile. But the same grayscale is being scaled to that little tiny bit of difference. So that's why we have these very different looking kinds of presentations of each of these tiles. So that's not ideal. So we could set them all on a common ramp. There's ways to do that, but that gets a little bit involved. We don't really need to do that right now. I think a more useful skill to have at this point is to know how to pull multiple DEMs together into one big one, right? So a good basic processing skill to have. So I'm actually going to remove these. We don't need them. So I clicked on the top one, held down Shift, and I'm just going to right click and go remove, get rid of them all. So what we want to do is a process called mosaic to new raster data set. Okay, so go to the search bar up here. You'll get your search and type in mosaic to new raster, just like that. And you'll get mosaic to new raster. Okay, and then open the tool. And if you left them in there, you'd see you'd have a drop down here where you could select them one by one. But that would take a long time in this case because there's so many. Better to just grab them from the folder directly, right? Our DEM folder inside of Practicum 12. Click on the top one, click on the bottom one, press add. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to take all these and merge them into one big DEM, into one file. So now it wants the output location, right? The folder it's going to go into. So create a new folder inside of DEM called merged, like I have here. So just hit new folder, create a new folder, name it, call it merged. Click on the merge. After you create it, you're going to probably click away and then click on it, press add, and then that'll populate this field with our output location. And then we want to give this raster data set a name. Let's just call it DEM merged, okay? And if we leave an extension off, it's going to write to an ESRI grid file, right? So the default, if you remember from the, I think it was the first or second quiz, rasters without an extension in this environment, in ESRI software environments, means ESRI grid format. And that's a proprietary format that ESRI developed. That's essentially a highly compressed raster format. It's a way to save space on the hard drive, essentially. Yeah, so let's see. So DEM merged. Here I'm getting a red X because I've already got one named that in my destination directory, but you won't have that problem. Okay, let's go ahead and define the spatial reference, right? So the reason for that is because these DEMs that we're merging came from another program. I want to make sure that ESRI is actually reading the spatial information correctly. Now, it's probably the case that Photoscan wrote some kind of spatial reference information into it, but it may not be in the format that ESRI recognizes. So by clicking on spatial reference here and we define it, we're going to sort of force it to rewrite the definition of the spatial reference. Okay, so we're in, again, UTM zone 16N. I've already added it to my favorites, but you would find it under, right? You would find it under projected coordinate systems, and then under UTM, and then under WGS 1984 datum, then Northern Hemisphere. And then when you get to 16N, just click it once and add it to your favorites, and then press OK. Because we're going to use it again, it'll be easier to find the next time if you don't have to hunt around for it. So, okay, so I'm going to go, I should go ahead and do that. So 16N. Okay, pixel type in this case, let me see, we have a DEM that is a single band. We need decimal places, right? Because we know that we have fractions of meters, right? So an 8-bit unsigned pixel type does not allow decimal places. It's integer only, and it's only 0 and higher, 0 and greater, because it's unsigned. If it was 8-bit signed, you could have negative values. But anyway, so 8-bit, well, I'll get into these pixel types later, but basically an 8-bit means that you have each pixel has 8 bits and 8-bit depth pixel, which if it's unsigned, you can end up with values from 0 to 255, but nothing greater, and no decimals, right? And so actually there's good descriptions of these. So if you hit show help, it'll show you what each of these means, okay? And there's more extensive documentation in their help files. Okay, so what we want is something that allows decimal places. So that would be 32-bit float. Let's go ahead and change that to 32-bit float. Cell size leave blank. It'll just take the lowest, I think, value of the cells of all those. They should be all the same size, so we don't really need to worry about that. Number of bands. So an Esri grid can only be one band, right? Like a JPEG or a TIFF is 3 bands, red, green, and blue. That's the one limitation of a grid file is it can only be one band. It's really made for analytical purposes, not for really displaying color per se. Okay, so we've got one band, and then I think that's all. Yeah, that's all we need. So hit OK, and it'll process those all into one big DEM, and it will show up on your screen then after that. So I'm going to cancel it because I've already done it, and I'll come right back. Okay, so yeah, so you should have something that looks sort of like this now, where you've got one big DEM and it's all on the same grayscale, so that's a good thing. It's progress. So quick navigation interface issues here. So you've got your navigation symbol here, which is the default, and it'll sort of rotate around if you left click and drag. If you right click, it'll zoom in and out. It'll be kind of jittery and fast, but it'll do that. If you at least on my mouse, if I hold down the scroll wheel and click with it, I can drag it sort of around the screen to kind of recenter it. Okay, so just basics. This is like a bird. You can fly through it like a flight simulator kind of thing. So it looks like a little duck when it's not moving. And then look down here in the lower left. If I left click once, you get a fly speed of 0. I left click again, fly speed of 1, 2, 3. I'm just left clicking and it speeds up. Now if I right click, it slows down, right? And you can obviously steer around and so forth. So I'm going to slow down to 0 again, just to give you a sense. So you can do fly throughs and you can record the screen and that sort of thing. It's pretty cool. It's good for presentation purposes and saving little movies and things for PowerPoint and that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my kind of principal navigation thing here. So if you notice, so it's rotating. What this tool does, the center on target, is wherever you click it, it sets that rotation point. Okay, so you can always sort of reset the rotation point. And that's just strictly for how we navigate and view it on the screen. It's not changing any of the spatial data. It's just like if I click way over here, right, then it's going to rotate about that axis there, or at that point there, right, versus over here, right? Now it's rotating on that point over there. Whoops, flipped it over upside down. Okay, so I'm going to go back to full extent, and it sort of resets it. Okay, so I'm going to reset my target somewhere in the middle. Okay, and then these are sort of standard zoom in and out, and here's a pan tool. Okay. All right, so you notice that the DEM is totally flat. That's because ArcScene isn't reading the elevation data as 3D data yet. It's just displaying it as an image, as a flat image. So the way to get that to work is to go into the properties for the layer and go to the base heights tab, okay? And it says no elevation values from a surface. You want to change that to floating on a custom surface, which is itself. In other words, it's going to read the values off the DEM and it's going to float on those values. Raster resolution, let's go ahead and open that. So you'll see right now it's only displaying 256 rows on each axis. That's really low. In other words, it's resampling from 15,000 down to 256 rows. So let's increase that, but not all the way up to max. If we did that, it would probably crash because that would be a really, really massive raster to try to render in 3 dimensions. Okay, so even at 1500 by 1500, we're getting a 23 centimeter resolution render, right? Which we're just interested in displaying it. We're not really, we're not changing the data, we're just changing how it's rendering on screen. So that's a good resolution, I think, 23 centimeter increments. Now let's go to the symbology tab, change this to some kind of color ramp, like we could do something that shows a lot of variation just for fun to get at sort of very small scale changes, which is kind of what we're interested in here. And yeah, so then let's see, then we can change our display from nearest neighbor to bilinear interpolation. So we've done that before. That's going to smooth out our values between pixels and how it's rendering. Now if I hit apply, it's probably going to work for a while, and it's going to jump up. It may even jump off the screen, but don't panic. That's okay. Then hit OK. Now if we right click on here and go zoom to layer, it'll sort of center it up for us, and then we can navigate about and see what we got. Okay. So some weirdness here, right? But some of that is tree trunks. Some of that is cars. These are cars right here. That's probably a tree trunk. That's probably a tree trunk. So in other words, when we did the processing in Photoscan, it took out the crowns of the trees and the small branches. We took that out as noise, but it can't get rid of. It didn't get rid of the trunks, right? So, and then we've got some sinks in here, which is kind of a more serious problem, because what it did is the program couldn't interpret the totally homogeneous blacktop and created some sinks where there shouldn't be. So we could go back and reprocess, right? So we could set the depth filtering to aggressive rather than moderate, and it would probably knock a lot of that out. We'd get a more regular surface. But we're not going to worry about that right now. This is really kind of for illustrative purposes. Okay. So I'm going to hold down the scroll wheel button and sort of zoom up, and then I'm going to zoom back a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Okay, so that's our DEM. Let's work on the orthomosaic now. Okay, so I'll be right back, and we'll do that. Okay, now for the orthomosaic itself, we also want to mosaic it to a new raster because it exists as a whole bunch of tiles as well. So go ahead and click on Mosaic to New Raster. If this isn't here, you can reopen your search bar and Mosaic to New Raster, and go open it up. And so now we're gonna select we're gonna navigate to our orthomosaic folder, and again click on the top one, hold down Shift, and then click on the last one and hit Add. Okay. Now our output location is going to be ortho merged. You're going to need to create a new folder and name it ortho merged, and click on it once again, and then hit add. That's our output location. Now our raster is going to be, we can just call it ortho merged. I'm going to call mine 02 because I've already created one. I don't want to throw an error. Okay, so again, let's define the spatial reference to 16N. Make sure you do WGS84 16N, your TM zone 16M. Here, pixel type of 8-bit unsigned is okay because JPEGs compress all the complex sort of values that can be in uncompressed image files to 0 to 255 on red, green, and blue. Okay, so 8-bit unsigned is okay. Leave the cell size alone and change the number of bands. Well, it's blank, and we know we need RGB, so there are 3 bands. Okay, so that's what that's about. And hit OK. Oops, I forgot to add. I'm glad this happened actually. I need to put JPEG right there, JPG. JPG after that. You have to specify the extension. So there you go. Okay, now hit OK. And it's going to generate your JPEG, and it'll add it. I'm going to pause while this is processing. Okay, so then when that's done processing, it'll probably take quite a while. That's all right. You'll have something that looks like kind of like this, and you'll see that they're sort of in relation to one another if you look straight down on them, but obviously our orthomosaic is still way down at 0, and we got our DEM up here. Well, that's pretty easy to deal with. We just have to go to our ortho merged layer now. Actually, let's move it up above here and go to properties, and now we're going to do the base heights on it. So we're going to float it on a custom surface, which is our DEM. We're going to float it on top of the DEM. Again, let's go to our raster resolution. So, we've got 15,000 by 15,000. Let's do something like the same, like 1500, I think is what we had for the DEM. So 1,500, not 15,000. Again, if you do that, it'll probably crash it. So 1,500. And let's go to symbology. That should be okay. Let's go to display, change it to bilinear. Now hit apply. Okay, so now it's all sort of mashed together like this. So now we can just uncheck the DEM, and we've got our model more or less here. Again, it's not rendering at full resolution. I could play around with it to bring this resolution up. There's another place where we could do this, which is in rendering, quality enhancements here. You can bump that up a little bit, but don't try to bump it up all the way. It'll probably crash your machine. Yeah, let me see here once. I'm going to go to base heights, bump it up to 2,000. Playing around with the rendering here. I might be able to get it to go all the way. If it crashes, well, not the end of the world. Yeah, see, now I can read those. Yeah, it's cranked all the way up now. But don't worry about doing that. The main thing is to understand how these basic properties work here, how the basic functionality of ArcScene works. So you see you've got scene layers. You could go to the properties here, and we could increase the vertical exaggeration. Right now it's at none. We could make the Z values, multiply them by 1.5, and we would sort of exaggerate the topography. So you can see that. I'll show it in profile. Now if I go to scene properties and change it back to none, hit apply, you see everything kind of shrink down in the background. Okay, so that's that. So go ahead and press save. And then what you're going to want to do is save Practicum 12, the entire folder, to the Practicum 12 completed folder on the server. All right? Thanks.